I'm Jim,
And I'm Garrett.
and this is Jim and
Jim.
Garrett at the movies. We're
Yeah,
a little off there, but
I
what?
think I think we got that one. I think we got that one.
You think we got that one? All right, great. Well, welcome to this episode of Jim and Garrett at the movies. We will be reviewing the box office winning, surprisingly box office winning, Bohemian Rhapsody, the new Queen biopic with Rami Malek. Also, our movie club entry will be Almost Famous, and we will update you on our brief poll from last week, and we will talk about the historical inaccuracies of Bohemian Rhapsody, whether or not that affects how we see films. So let's start with discussions of Bohemian Rhapsody. As always, all of our review segments are spoiler free, so we will not be spoiling this film, but we will probably be spoiling the film. We will actually be spoiling the film in our discussions of its historical inaccuracies. This film was purportedly directed by Bryan Singer. Of course, he was fired halfway through the production of the film, and it was Dexter Fletcher who took over as the director of the film. It stars Rami Malek, and it is a fairly basic biopic. It tracks the the formation of Queen. It tracks the early successes of Queen, maybe its early challenges, and some of Freddie Mercury's personal relationships. Most of this is kind of standard biopic stuff. But I'll sort of turn it over to you, Garrett, and let you tell me what you thought about this film before I give my opinions on it as well.
Well, I think the film definitely has its strengths. I think Rami Malek's performance is really excellent, and he continues to impress me with his acting abilities. Bit of a hometown boy for you. He graduated from University of Evansville, not too far from where you are right now. And I really enjoyed the sequences when we were in sort of the studio with them as they were writing the songs. It gave a real impression that you're sort of fly on the wall at the formation of these incredibly iconic and epic and very famous songs, which everyone knows and loves. And that felt really neat and really good. At the same time, those sort of episodes aren't really enough to string together a narrative. I'm not. I felt very much like the film was sort of struggling to find a story to tell. Now, I don't think that's because the story of Queen and the story of Freddie Mercury is uninteresting. I just think it's because I'm not really sure it fits all that well in a film format. It doesn't quite seem the natural place for it. So perhaps this is a problem with the changing of directors. Perhaps it's a problem with the screenplay, with the producers. I'm not sure. Or maybe it's just the source material didn't lend itself very well to the film, which, as I say, is too bad because Rami Malek's performance really does deserve a high praise. So overall, I thought it was a mixed bag.
Yeah, I think you're right. Mixed bag is certainly a way. Look, Rami Malek is technically flawless in this film. He gets Freddie Mercury's mannerisms. He gets the look right. It's a fantastic, technically flawless portrayal. But the film is unfocused. It's uneven. It lacks the courage of any sort of conviction, and it didn't have a thesis. It didn't have a central focus. It didn't want to tell me something use something about this story to tell me something about now or life or even then. This was just a loosely connected series of events, some of which, as we'll get into later, are completely fabricated, and some of which are, in and of themselves compelling. I think that there's one central relationship, and it's the relationship between Freddie and his lifelong friend and companion, the person to whom in real life he left his fortune to, Mary. And I was really interested in that relationship. And after a certain point in the narrative, I don't want to give too much away about when this was, but after a certain point in the narrative, she kind of took a back seat to the story, and I wondered what would happen if the film used that as its central focus to say something really interesting about relationships and how really deep relationships can often be devoid of sexuality and sexual attraction, and that way we can really get to explore Freddie Mercury's sexuality, which I think is drastically downplayed in this film. I think it's tongue-tied by the PG-13 rating, which sort of constrains the film from delving into Freddie Mercury's sexuality. It's now I don't need to see, you know, sexual escapades on film all the time. What I need to see, though, is this essential aspect of Mercury's character dealt with in a more intelligent way than merely an off-screen problem, rather than an essential aspect of his character. So I think the film's lack of a central thesis or focus is a serious detriment to the film, and it really brought the film down for me.
I think it's an interesting analysis. I'm not sure how convinced a film has to have a thesis as such. I think lots of great films lack a thesis in that sense. You know, sometimes films, I think some of the best films are ones that are sort of deliberately vague or ambiguous, or sort of force you to face sort of two conflicting ideas rather than sort of trying to sell you on one. But nonetheless, I agree with you about it sort of lacking focus. I rather liked the relationship that he had with Mary in those scenes. It could have been more an interesting film if it was more front and center, if there was more attention paid to that. And you know, again, you can sort of imagine perhaps, you know, the PG-13 rating. I don't know exactly why Bryan Singer was fired from the film, but you know, it's not uncommon for a filmmaker to want to be more daring than the studio is comfortable with. Maybe Bryan Singer wanted to take it more in that direction or something like that, and it's somewhat of a shame.
He was accused of not showing up for certain times and sort of derelicting his duty. And then there were rumors. Now, look, all of these are unconfirmed rumors, and you know, nobody knows for sure. But what we're hearing through various media outlets are that he clashed with Rami Malek as well. So it does kind of become a Franken project with multiple directors having their fingers in this pie. Go ahead.
As with Solo, perhaps this is something to blame, but you know, again, it's really basically impossible to tell at this point. One just sort of makes you wonder and wish what might have been.
Yeah, but let's circle back to that point about the thesis. I mean, I compare this film to there are two films that I think this film positively compares to, neither of which unfortunately is Almost Famous, which we predicted that it might. But one is The Social Network. Now, that's a film like Bohemian Rhapsody that takes serious liberties with Zuckerberg's life. In his Academy Awards acceptance speech, Aaron Sorkin said, "I'd like to thank Mark Zuckerberg for letting us use his life as a metaphor for today." And that's actually what I want to get at, is that The Social Network uses Zuckerberg's life as a metaphorical way of exposing how we as a society are affected by social media and by Facebook. The thesis of that film, in my interpretation, the thesis of that film is that things like Facebook turn us into cruel sociopaths, not unlike the way Mark Zuckerberg is portrayed in that film. I would like something similar for the Freddie Mercury biopic. I don't know what that is, but I would like something similar if they're going to take serious liberties with the source material. Right. On the other hand, you have something like Sid and Nancy, Gary Oldman, playing Sid Vicious, which focuses in on that one relationship, and through that one relationship, we also get to learn about the Sex Pistols' rise and fall and all of that shit. But because it's so focused on that one relationship, we're sort of tied to the will they, won't they of these characters. Well, actually, no, we're not tied to the will they, won't they. We're tied to how is he going to shoot her? How is she going to die? Aspect of that film. I think she, am I remembering that right? He shoots her, right?
I honestly don't remember, and I
Okay.
also don't really.
Something like that. If I am wrong, I am sorry to Sid Vicious and Nancy. But I believe there's somebody somebody gets shot. But there's a real focus in that relationship. So I'll let you respond to this, especially while I look up whether or not I have horribly fucked up.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, hearing you say that, I definitely would not want this film to be made into a thesis film. Now, you're setting aside for the moment the liberties that they take, because we're going to talk about that later. I think the film does a very good job of sort of deliberately saying, no, we don't want to transform Freddie Mercury into anyone's poster boy. We don't want him to be a stand-in for the bisexual struggle, or for AIDS, or for anything like that. Freddie Mercury was Freddie Mercury, and to make him into a metaphor would really be a betrayal of his legacy, I think. I mean, again, this is something I think the film captures very well. Freddie Mercury was a consummate entertainer. He was a larger than life personality, and any film about him needs to be about him, not about some message or something else that people are going to want to get across. Not that that film couldn't be good, but in making such a film, I think you would be betraying Mercury's legacy.
That's entirely possible, and I'm not saying that we need the film to be a metaphor for a particular social message. I'm not doing a one-to-one comparison where I'm saying, well, Freddie Mercury must say something about today. But I do think that what if this was a what if this was a movie about sexuality that put that at the forefront? What if this was a movie about artistic expression, which I think it might be trying? Some critics have argued that this is a film about how a person can live his life not being able to connect to anyone and only being alive on stage. If that's really what they were going for, then okay, then let's make that the focus and thesis of the film, that in an oppressed and oppressing culture, the only way that you can really self-express is through art. I would like that to be a thesis for a film. I mean, wouldn't you think that that would be something that you would be able to glom onto?
I mean, again, I can't. I've not read a biography of Freddie Mercury, but it seems to me that I doubt that that's true. I mean, again, we're going to talk about how much liberties you can take, but if a serious objection I would have to that film would be, it doesn't, based on what I saw in the film, it doesn't seem like that was the case for Mercury. Definitely, he came alive on stage, no denying that. But there was a lot going on off stage too, in the creative process and his relationships with other people, his discovery of his own sexuality and so forth. Now, he wasn't in a cocoon or in a coma when he was off stage. So that dichotomy that you're putting forward, again, I'm strong words here for someone who can't claim to know the facts with a lot of confidence, but it seems like that would be a betrayal of his legacy. I don't want to see a film about an artist who struggles with himself and his stage persona versus his real life. I want to see a movie about Freddie Mercury. I want to see a movie that tells me what kind of person Freddie Mercury was.
Regardless of how we would, okay, fair. I mean, we could keep going back and forth as always. I think regardless of whether or not, regardless of my particular fixes for the film, I think we'll both agree that this isn't that film.
Yes.
That this isn't focused enough to be a film about Freddie Mercury.
But again, I think one of the reasons why that might be the case is because perhaps the subject matter simply might not have lent itself to that. And if that's the case, I got to say, if it's a choice between totally bastardizing the man's screen presentation and telling an unfocused film, I think I prefer the unfocused film.
I would not. I mean, I think I would prefer a film that's focused on one relationship Like if we're not going to go the thesis-driven route, then we're going to go the focused route toward let's just talk about Freddie and Mary, or let's just talk about Freddie and Jim, his partner later in life. Let's just talk about that aspect of his relationship, so that this film is far more manageable. I think there's a lot about that. One tweet that I really liked from our friend Stephen Libby of Cinema Blend. He said something along the lines of, one day, let me get the exact quote here. I look forward to a Queen biopic that comes out in 20 years when the rest of the band is dead and somebody can make something with some real depth to it. He's responding to reports that the living members of the band, including Brian May, had some serious editorial say in how this film was depicted, and early production troubles about this film. Early production troubles surrounding this film indicated that they wanted the rest of the band members of Queen to have equal time with Freddie Mercury, and of course we as the audience said no, we're interested in that guy more than Brian May. So yeah, I mean, interesting discussion all around. Let's start. Are we ready to wrap this up, or do you want any other? What would you give this out of 5 stars there, Garrett?
Out of 5 stars, I'd give it a solid 2.5. You know, it's very sort of middle of the road. You know, it has clear strengths, but also clear weaknesses, and they basically balance.
Well, I'm at 2. It's a little bit lower for me simply because the only thing that recommends it is Rami Malek's technically flawless portrayal.
Are you a fan of Queen as a band?
Yeah, like no, but yeah, like it's one of those that I got home and even the movie to some degree reminded me of, oh yeah, they did that, and oh yeah, they did that. So yeah, I like many of their songs. Don't Stop Me Now, Bohemian Rhapsody, of course. Find Me Someone to Love, and then Freddie Mercury's solo, or with David Bowie, Under Pressure. I think those are all good. We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions and all those sort of sports stadium songs. Even Don't Stop Me Now, really. Those sports stadium songs don't really do much for me, but at the same time, I recognize that they're cultural appeal. How about you? Are you a fan?
Not a big fan. I mean, I like the hits, basically. I've never really sort of delved deeply into their catalog. I remember very distinctly the first time I heard Bohemian Rhapsody. It was in the film Wayne's World. I had had no exposure to the band or the song before that, and it was a very memorable first impression. But one of the things which I sort of note is that I don't see many, even though, you know, I checked on Spotify and some of their biggest songs have more than 500 million plays. There aren't that many covers of Queen songs. And I think that really is sort of a testimony that it's hard to do a Queen song because Queen does them just so Queen. It's hard,
right.
Them. It's hard to take them a different direction. And again, I think that this is a strength of the film, is that they do sort of, I think, do a good job of making you appreciate that music and where it came from, even if they fail to connect that to a larger narrative.
Yeah, try doing a Queen karaoke and you'll see how hard it is. I mean, Adam Lambert, I think, is currently touring with the remaining members of Queen. I think he might be the only modern singer who has the who has the range to be able to do that Mercury. I think he had like a 4-octave range. I remember reading something along those lines. And let me also quickly fact check myself. This is Nancy Spungen of Sid and Nancy spiraled into, this is from, I had to look on Wikipedia, sorry, spiraled into deeper drug abuse, punctuated by domestic violence, with Vicious allegedly attacking her. Their relationship ended on October 12th, 1978, when Spongen's body was found under a sink in a bathroom in their room at Hotel Chelsea. She had suffered a single fatal stab wound to the abdomen. Vicious reportedly owned the knife that made the wound, accused of second-degree murder. pleaded not guilty and died of a heroin overdose before the trial could take place. So, fact checking myself, I thought that he had shot her, but it was apparently a stab wound. So, my mistake. All right, let's move on to something that's. This is the worst segue of all time. Something that's not a mistake. Almost Famous. Oh, Almost Famous. Almost Famous, written and directed by Cameron Crowe, semi-autobiographical. That we follow the story into this band, Stillwater, and a young reporter for Rolling Stone, a young high school boy, is given a report by to write a story for Rolling Stone about this up and coming rock band. It stars Patrick Fugit, Frances McDormand, Billy Crudup, Kate Hudson, Jason Lee. I think I said Patrick Fugit. If I didn't, Patrick Fugit, Anna Paquin, Zoe Deschanel, a brief Philip Seymour Hoffman, a brief unfortunate cameo by Jimmy Fallon, and this film is utter magic. This is set in the early 70s, and it really captures that the glam rock of the 70s. Well, maybe not glam rock. The rock and roll scene of the early 1970s. I love this movie. Garrett, let's heap praises upon this thing. Unless you, as I recall, you love this film as well.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic film. Wonderful story, wonderfully told. It is, one of the best movies about rock and roll I think that's ever been made, and I think that's Cameron Crowe's wheelhouse. He's made several movies about rock. He clearly has a good feel for it. He knows sort of not only what makes it good, but how to tell stories about it that are compelling, engaging, well structured. This is arguably his best film, but I think he's got a lot of good ones, so it's hard to say for sure. It does a fantastic job of balancing a kind of wish fulfillment, right? Because I mean, who didn't want to work for Rolling Stone and go on tour with rock bands when you're 15 years old, right? I mean, that's fantastic. But at the same time, it also leavens that wish fulfillment with some harsh realities and some serious difficulties in a way that sort of, it's not so much a cautionary, careful what you wish for sort of tale, but it does in some ways sort of deflate the fantasy of it and brings it down to earth, while at the same time still sort of somehow maintaining an almost slightly off the ground connection with the real world, which makes it all the more bizarre that it is this semi-autobiographical story about Crowe's young life. So it is, to borrow a phrase, a magical mystery tour.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key word is magic. Like this, that's the word that I keep going back to when I think of Almost Famous. I think this film is absolutely magical. And it's in no small part to Kate Hudson's performance. Is this the best she gets? I think so. I haven't seen anything approaching this charming and this this character. Penny Lane has depth. She is not just a rock groupie. She's not just she's a character with real depth to her and some interesting contradictions, where she both loves the life she's chosen and also recognizes that she's kind of discarded at the end of the day. And there's there's that one moment where and we spoil our movie club entries, so here's a spoiler. When she finds out that that she was betrayed by the Billy Crudup character, and Patrick Fugit tells her, and she has a moment where she recognizes it and chooses to smile, and it's just it's there's nothing this is why film is one of the more powerful mediums, because there's nothing else that could capture that moment so well as an actress living that character in front of you. I love Kate Hudson in this film. I love this movie. I love everything about this movie.
Except for Jimmy Fallon.
What's that?
Except for Jimmy Fallon, apparently.
Except for Jimmy Fallon, but whatever. Like,
Yeah, I can't say I'm a fan of Kate Hudson in general, but definitely she is fantastic in this. Yeah, that scene, I go back to that scene again. It is such a masterclass of subtlety and mixed emotions and just layers upon layers of reaction and timing and choices. It's one of those things where, you know, sometimes you sort of play like, you know, a Monday morning quarterback and think, well, you know, I would have done that differently, and you know, I would have made different choices if I were writing or directing or even acting. But that, you know, it's so pure and so fantastic. I cannot imagine ever producing something like that, you know, in any kind of creative capacity, because it's just so elevated and so use the word charm. It cuts right to the heart, and it shows so much complexity and depth. It is a genuine moment of art, and it's wonderful.
Right. I mean, it's charming. It's heartbreaking in parts. It's funny. I mean, that one moment where Anna Paquin sort of turns to her friends and say, like, they're bored for the evening, and says, "Let's deflower the kid." You know, that's hilarious. And of course, you know, there's yeah, that kind of brings up your wish fulfillment. Yeah, I mean, there might be some cringy parts, because after all, these are all younger than 18-year-olds, and I think the when Penny Lane has a birthday, or one of the characters has a birthday, there's a birthday cake that reads, you know, we don't know how old you are now. So that's let's just pretend that this is in their off year between high school and college. Yeah, but it's go ahead.
To say part of what makes this film interesting is the sort of the misdirection. The main characters are not the rock band. You know, they are basically background. They're there so the other characters have something to do. You know, they're scaffolding, if you will, that the rest of the film is sort of built upon and built around. And while I think the music in this film is really good, you know, it captures the, like I said, the spirit of that era of rock and roll. It is not a film, you know. I mean, again, I said it's a film about rock and roll, but again, the emotional focus, the emotional core, isn't in the music. It's not in the writing of the music, or even in the performing of the music. You know, it's a love letter to music, but it's a love letter to what music does between people, how it bonds them together, how it makes them travel, makes, you know, again, there's the wonderful scene when they're on the bus and they all start singing that
Tiny Dancer.
Was that? Yeah, Tiny Dancer.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, we've had those moments, you know.
Exactly. Yeah.
Friends, and you start singing together. It's fantastic. It captures the feel of what music does for people together. And that's something that is universal. That's something that is powerful, and something that is incredibly hard to get right in film. But goddamn, Cameron Crowe makes it look easy.
That's yes. I like retweet everything you said. I absolutely agree with you. This is it's such a phenomenal film. I really can't find anything that I dislike about this, except for, I mean, even Jimmy Fallon is I just find him as kind of tasteless as a personality. But gosh, this is so good. Billy Crudup, let's talk about him for a little bit, because you say that the band is scaffolding, and I think you're absolutely right. But he's one of the band members who sort of emerges as a character. He emerges as a three-dimensional person who has something to say about how this plot develops, and especially at the end, when he ends up backing up Patrick Fugit's article. That I think is an important point, because I think he shows himself to be one of integrity. Even over the course of the film, he has proven himself to be duplicitous. Billy Crudup also has one of the great moments of the film. What is it? I am a golden god, I think. Yes, I am a golden god. One of the great moments of the movie. So yeah, I think one of the things that Cameron Crowe does so well in this movie is every single person has depth. You know, Billy Crudup's character has depth. Kate Hudson's character, Frances McDormand's character has depth. I mean, would you let your kid go running around with a bunch of rock stars? if you were in your right mind, yeah, you would, but you would also have the same worries and anxieties that Frances McDormand's character has. Yeah, this is, and Philip Seymour Hoffman has some great lines when he's sort of trying to talk Patrick Fugit down. The Patrick Fugit
Not
character,
cool. Yeah, his line, his whole monologue about how we're not cool. We're the reporters. You know, the
right?
band is cool, but we are not cool.
That's what I was referring to. I love that moment. Oh, every moment of this film is meticulously well done, and you said that this might be Cameron Crowe's best. I think this is unquestionably Cameron Crowe's best. I understand that Jerry Maguire and some of his other films have their fans.
I'm a huge fan of Singles. I think Singles
Yeah, I
is
like Singles
a
too.
fantastic film.
Hmm. I like Singles too, but Singles, this has larger scope, larger ambition. It swings for the fences a little bit more than Singles does, and I think it hits a home run every time it does. So I love this movie. I'm giving it 5 stars. That might be the highest I've ever rated a film on the internet. Uh, what well, I mean, I've had a couple other 5-star films, but this was among my favorites.
Yeah, I think I got to agree. I can't, I'm searching for flaws. I'm searching for things to criticize, and I'm just coming up dry. I think there's nothing this film does wrong. Not even Jimmy Fallon. So yeah, I gotta give it 5.
Yeah, I mean, there's one might be able to say that its third act is a little um once 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 will once the Patrick Fugit character kind of gets away from the band and writes his own article, and there's sort of a detachment, a separation between him and the band. I think you can make the argument that the third act slows down a little bit. But aside from that, that's quibbling with a really amazing film. Um, okay, so we certainly recommend Almost Famous more than Bohemian Rhapsody. Uh, all right, so I'm gonna do a brief update. Garrett, we didn't do um, the survey in our classes of students who have heard of or seen Casablanca. I was actually able to carve time in my classes to do a quick hand raise poll. 22 out of 82 students had heard of Casablanca, and by heard of, I was like, all right, you have to know that it's a movie, and then it's I put some certain details on it, but 0 out of 82 have seen it. In my classes, this is in Evansville, and so it's a completely unscientific, terribly well done poll, but still it makes me concerned that when things like Filmstruck get shut down. So
Bunch of uncultured swine in Evansville.
I did not say that. Yes, but one of them actually, as I was talking about, they were like, "Well, why are you asking us this?" And I'm like, "Well, it's a thing for a thing." And as I was doing it's a thing for a podcast, one of them torrented Casablanca right there in class. So he was watching fucking Casablanca on his phone, which I had mixed feelings about. On the one hand, don't watch Casablanca on your phone. On the other hand, oh cool, Garrett was right. You can torrent things so quickly. This is awesome. So yeah, there's certainly benefits to that. So at this point, we are going to give you our spoiler warning. We are going to spoil Bohemian Rhapsody because we're going to have to spoil Bohemian Rhapsody in order to talk about its historical inaccuracies. So if you haven't seen Bohemian Rhapsody, you don't want to be spoiled, go ahead and click away and then click back to hear us talk about the historical inaccuracies of the film that you saw while you clicked away. So spoilers. Okay. Bohemian Rhapsody. Um So this comes from Screen Rant. I'm just gonna read there. I'm gonna read its sort of section titles. And that will I can sort of expand on each of these section titles as our conversation goes along. But let us I'll read each of the section titles and then we'll talk about them. Bohemian Rhapsody changes almost everything about Queen's formation. Bohemian Rhapsody cuts much of Mary Austin out of Freddie's life. Freddie Mercury's sexuality gets downplayed in Bohemian Rhapsody. Paul Prenter was a bad influence, quote unquote, but Queen didn't really break up. That entire conflict was kind of was manufactured. Mike Myers' character. Now that we're in spoiler zone, Garrett, what did you think of the Mike Myers joke where he said Bohemian Rhapsody will never be a song that people will headbang in cars to?
I fucking loved it.
Oh, you did?
Again, because that was my first exposure to Queen, my first exposure to that song. I don't know if you heard, but Mike Myers was on Colbert, and he said the reason why he got that part in Bohemian Rhapsody is because when they were making Wayne's World, he actually went toe to toe with Lorne Michaels, because Lorne Michaels wanted them to use a Guns N' Roses song. And Mike Myers said, look, I love Guns N' Roses, but that's not the music I grew up to. The music I grew up to was Queen and Bohemian Rhapsody, and this is the song I want to do. And he basically was willing to walk away from the movie if he wasn't allowed to use it, at least as he told the story. So Michaels folded and let him use the song, and that mirrors quite well what happens in the film in Bohemian Rhapsody. So I thought that there was a poetry there, a symmetry. So it was nice.
I did a ha 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 rather than a full-throated laugh. It was kind of like, yeah, I see what you did there. Yeah. Bohemian Rhapsody, to continue. Bohemian Rhapsody changes the timeline of Freddie's battle with AIDS. He did not find out that he had HIV until 1987, 2 years after the Live Aid performance. Queen was legendary at Live Aid, but didn't, in fact, save it. And what happened after the end. This paragraph goes on to, this section goes on to talk about how Jim Hutton and Freddie, their relationship after they got together, which was sort of used as kind of a climactic moment right before Live Aid. They get together and then they meet his parents immediately after. That's all stretched out, and that there's some kind of bullshit there. So do you want me to go through any of these more specifically to talk about what exactly the historical inaccuracies were, or were there any of these that interest you, that bothered you, that on and on and on?
I mean, based on that description, at least none of those bother me at all. Though, I mean, those all seem like standard concessions that you make for building a narrative together. I mean, you could say, yeah, you want to see more about Mary, or you want to see more about his bisexuality, but that's about downplaying, not focusing. You have 2 hours, 15 minutes to tell the story of the life of a human being. You're going to have to put the focus somewhere. So you can criticize the decision to focus it there rather than there, but that's not an inaccuracy. That's not a problem with the truthfulness of the film.
Well, there are a couple. I mean, I'll sort of push back on that a little bit, because the film tries to demonize Freddie by saying that he's the one that wanted to do a solo career before anybody else, and that's not true. Two of the Queen band members one of them had two solo albums, even before Freddie Mercury put out a solo album. So the idea that this band was going to break up because one of them wanted to do a solo album, when in reality, two of them had already done solo albums even before Freddie Mercury did, that's a manufactured conflict that deliberately makes Freddie Mercury out to be a villain.
Yeah, I don't know. That doesn't bug me at all. I mean, it wasn't. They didn't almost break up because he wanted to do a solo album. They almost broke up because of a whole host of problems involving his ego, the infighting they've been having for a long time. the solo album scene was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Now, maybe in reality, there was no such straw that broke the camel's back, and you couldn't find a single thing to pin it on in a way that would be cinematic like that. So it seems to me that falls well within artistic license to pick that particular thing to stand in for a host of other things that ended up, in the real story actually driving them apart. What matters is that they were driven apart. The specifics, not so much. Again, I think it's true to the idea that Mercury was larger than life, that he was a bit of an egomaniac, and that served the band well in some circumstances, but also made him hard to deal with. If it misportrayed his personality, if actually he was a fun-loving guy that everyone got along with, that would be something I would object to. But taking a particular story to stand in for the fights and straw that broke the camel's back, that doesn't bug me at all. That's the kind of thing you have to do when you're telling a biopic, in my mind.
But it does so at the direct benefit of Brian May and the other members of the band. So the people who have a vested interest in promoting this film, people who actually are sort of holding the axe over the film, because if Queen didn't release the rights to the songs, then you don't have a fucking movie. And so they have editorial sway over this film, and in that particular conflict, they are made out to be angelic. They're not the ones pursuing. They're loyal to Queen. They're not the ones pursuing solo careers. It's this crazy Freddie Mercury guy that's pursuing solo careers. We're sticking to our original relationship, when that is demonstrably not true. If it's not doing Freddie Mercury an injustice by misportraying his character, then it's doing them an what's the opposite of injustice? It's complimenting them unduly for things that demonstrably are not correct.
Supererogatory or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, okay. Look, if you could tell me and show me that behind the scenes, Brian May and the other members of Queen, pulled strings to make them look better in this context and so forth, I'll admit that smells less appealing. I would be surprised if that was the case. I believe they wanted more screen time. I believe that they wanted their stories told. That makes sense. But I would be very surprised if they deliberately were calling, for a scene that made Freddie look like the bad guy. They loved Freddie. They fought. But they were family. I really think that that's true. I doubt that they would, want to make him look deliberately bad just so they could look better on screen. That I'm very skeptical of that way of talking about it.
Bohemian Rhapsody is the Fast and Furious of glam rock movies, because it's all about family. Go ahead.
Let's compare and contrast this quickly with some other films, which I think do take more questionable liberties. So for starters, Amadeus, which I think is a phenomenal, absolutely amazing film, and it completely slanders the character of Salieri. Salieri was nowhere, the actual historical record was nowhere near the terrible, prickish villain that he's made out to be in the playwright. What's his name?
Peter Shaffer.
Yeah, Peter Shaffer. Yeah, again, Peter Shaffer's marvelous play, but he sets up Salieri to be a total asshole when he simply wasn't. You want to talk about a slander or a serious misrepresentation? There's a good example of a serious misrepresentation.
Perhaps Social Network could be thrown in that in that bucket. Although I think that, Social Network's one of my favorite biopics of all time. I love The Social Network. And I love Amadeus. And this gets to sort of a central question that is worth debating. And I think that you and I can both agree that when it comes to film adaptations of works of literature, we can agree that the books don't matter. Film is a different medium than books, and so the books don't matter. You don't tell me that, well, it's all explained in the book. If you didn't explain it in the fucking movie, then you're movie is kind of shitty. But in biopics, do facts matter? Is there a different do we have a different point of view as it comes to fact-based films than we do to adaptations of literature? um that's a much trickier question.
It's a very interesting question, definitely. And, while certainly it deserves a more detailed analysis than we can afford to give it here, my short answer would be to say no, facts don't matter, but the spirit of them does. You have to get the spirit of the person, the general, the essence, if you will, for lack of a better term, of the person and the relationships and the events on screen. And so if you do something like an Amadeus, where you take a person who was a genuine, I don't know if it's fair to call him a decent guy, but definitely not a villain, and you make him out to be a villain, then you are trespassing on something that's ethically problematic. But if you don't spend enough time focusing on one relationship or a character's sexuality, or if you patch together one character out of a whole bunch of other characters to stand in for all those characters, because it simply wouldn't work in a movie if you had half a dozen record execs haggling him. That kind of stuff, to me, it's part of the medium. You can't tell a film unless you just have the perfect story that somehow the life of the person just happens to line up with the format. You're not going to be able to tell a biopic without taking certain artistic liberties. So what matters is not getting the facts right; it's getting the spirit right.
Yeah, I don't know, because I after Inglourious Bastards came out, I feared the student papers that would say things like, "When we killed Hitler in that theater," I feared that later on that our entire World War II history would be based upon Inglourious Bastards. Those of you who are listening who doubt that this is possible, it's possible. Trust us. It's possible. And I don't know. Maybe I'm a little bit to the other side of this. I do think facts matter a little bit more in biopics than the facts of a film adaptation of a book. And in this case, because of the involvement of the living band members in the production of this film, I look upon this film dubiously. And that's why I really liked Steven's tweet when he said, "I look forward to a Queen biopic that comes out 20 years when the rest of the band is dead, and somebody can make something with some real depth to it." Because at that point, we'll be able to look back upon all of these people historically and get some of the facts right. Because I do think that there was some editorial say, either consciously or unconsciously, on the part of the writers and producers. They need Queen to sign off on letting them use these songs.
Queen signed off. I mean, really, isn't the way the industry works. Unless they specifically ask for final cut approval or something like that.
I don't think they did that.
Exactly. So they signed off to have the film made. They probably made a few demands, got a few concessions, negotiated some things. I highly doubt that they bore down specifically enough to, in this scene, you have to make Freddie look like the asshole for wanting to go solo. That just does not strike me as a plausible backstory going on. Point one, Inglourious Bastards is not a biopic. Point two, it definitely violates the spirit of what actually happened. So,
right. But it's also one of our favorite. We also like that movie, right? Yeah.
Middling Tarantino. I mean, which is better than most directors, to be sure. But still.
I like that movie. I don't love that movie, but I like that movie. I'd call it upper echelon Tarantino. But that's because I don't like many of his other some of his other later work. What do you say about films like, I think films like Malcolm X do it right, where they get both the facts of the situation accurately and they also get the spirit of the person accurately. To the best of my knowledge, if I'm unaware of some facts that Malcolm X gets wrong, then
Yeah,
I stand corrected, but
I mean, not to get off on Malcolm X, but I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. The film definitely seemed to capture it right. But I also remember reading an essay by Tanahashi Coates about other biographies of Malcolm X, which did portray things in different lights, which is a fascinating fact just about biographies in general. Is the fact that you can write more than one, the fact that people can look at the same historical record and reconstruct the person's life in different ways. Makes me think I want a Rashomon biopic, right? I want a biopic that tells us the light story of a life from different perspectives and different points of views, which all comes together in a strange, incoherent pastiche that is, that's like something Jean-Paul Sartre would do.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, I know there has to be a biopic like that. I mean, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil is kind of coming to my mind. But
more true crime than biopic, but
yeah, but still, yeah. I mean, coming up with something like that is, yeah, that's an interesting. I like that. A Rashomon meets biopic. Yeah, there've got to be a few of those. Maybe I'll do some more thinking. And maybe the upcoming biopic, The Front Runner, about Gary Hart might do something along those lines. Who knows? Anyway, we will leave it there. Unless you have anything else to throw in this little bucket.
No, suffice to say, a lot more could be said about this topic.
Yeah, I think so too, and I'm really interested in kind of parsing out this idea. And you in the comments, let us know, what do you think, whether or not the facts matter, especially in 2018. All right, so next week, what will we be covering? We will be covering Beautiful Boy, the new Timothée Chalamet, Steve Carell film, Oscar contender, Oscar hopeful for Timothée Chalamet. He'll be going up against Rami Malek for sure. And we will be pairing that with the great Leonardo DiCaprio film, The Basketball Diaries. Until then, I'm Jim.
And I'm Garrett.
And this has been Jim and Garrett at the movies. Good night.